Pubic hair! By the way, not to be, the grammar police, but it's pubic hair. Pubic hair, that's the inflection. Pubic hair.
Inside Live weekdays.
Good morning, this is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. I'm Tom McKenzie in London. These are the stories that set your agenda.
Taking you from the U.S. market's close to the overnight session in Asia, we'll walk you through what you need to know to kickstart Europe's trading day. Live from our European headquarters, we bring you the day's top market-moving stories, unmatched expert analysis, and on-the-ground reporting from across the continent. Tune in to Daybreak Europe, only on Bloomberg Television. Context changes everything. Why do the biggest names in business choose Bloomberg Television?
That's a great question.
It's a very good question.
Interesting question.
Good question.
Great question.
I so appreciate that question.
You certainly ask interesting questions.
Bloomberg Television. Top experts, great questions.
Bringing you up-to-the-minute economic news whenever and wherever it happens. I'm Michael McKee in Victor, Idaho, and this is Bloomberg.
This is Wall Street Week. I'm David Weston, bringing you stories of capitalism. Early childhood education is as important as it is challenging for millions of Americans. It turns out that it's also an investment opportunity. We look at the large and growing role of private equity in raising our children. Plus, what that one big beautiful bill means for childcare and healthcare. Our special contributor, Larry Summers, takes us through where he thinks we may be going wrong. And the World Cup is coming to North America with all the excitement, all the potential, and all the costs surrounding it. We bring you to the host city of Toronto to hear why it thinks it's making a sound investment. But we start with the question puzzling so many investors these days. Why are the U.S. equity markets poised for growth while economists are predicting a slowdown? Rick Reeder is BlackRock's Chief Investment Officer of Global Fixed Income and head of the Global Allocation Investment Team.
The service economy is what drives this economy today. It's not a goods-oriented economy. It's not a commodity. It's not an export-oriented, not a heavy manufacturing, service-oriented. So most of what drives the economy is resilient to what is a goods, slowdown in goods. Second thing that I wouldn't have anticipated, I would have thought you've got more pricing transmission in, but it's pretty incredible how companies moved. In fact, now some of it in the near term, companies took it into margin.
So give us a sense, Rick, of where this economy is headed, because if you look at the stock market, it looks really good. It's really going places. At the same time, if you look at the markets, they say, well, we're going to have a rate cut or two this year. Normally you wouldn't cut rates into a robustly growing market.
So it's pretty extraordinary. I mean, it almost never happens in time. So there are a couple of things happen. First thing, I think all financial assets, there's an extraordinary amount of cash and money that has to flow somewhere. And the technicals and equities are great because companies are buying back their stocks. So I think the equity market is reflecting really good technicals. Earnings have been pretty good. But I think there's something different at play in terms of inflation. What's going to happen with productivity and innovation, inflation is going to come down. And the reason to bring interest rates down, which I'm a believer in, is the housing market is under pressure. So the real impact of interest rates on the economy today, I don't think it is in the historic sectors of who spends on CapEx, you think about AI spend, how the banks manage the risk. It's about housing. And today, if you look at the housing market, and particularly what impacts lower income, the people that borrow today are lower income, and they're adversely infected by where these rates are. If we get the rate down, you actually can bring home prices down, you build more houses, you'll actually reduce inflation. So I think it's quite consistent to bring the interest rate down, even though the economy is operating at a pretty good level. Where we're going is to a lower level of inflation, and I think we can bring it down. I mean, you think about inflation break-evens today, depending on which part of the curve, are 2.5 to 2 3/4. So the funds rate, even if you bring it down to 3 1/4, you're still above the rate of inflation. So I think we got plenty of room to drop it, even though the economy is operating well.
Does the yield curve on the Treasury indicate we do have a bigger problem with inflation than we think? Look at the 30-year, for example. We're significantly over 5 now. It's hanging in up there. So the short end, nice under control. Long end, not so much.
So I think the long end of the yield curve becomes untethered. First of all, the Fed generally
Sånn, hører dere meg, eller? Ja, da har jeg lyd ut i hvert fall. Rart.
Nå, hallo. Hører du meg nå, eller? Nei.
Skal jeg gjøre det? Lyd ut der, og så er det lyd der.
Det synes jeg ikke de har jo gått tilbake da. Hører du meg nå? Ja, nå hører du meg. Det jeg skulle si... Tusen takk, Morten. Det jeg skulle si... Jeg må ha Morten hjelpe meg, jeg skjønner ikke en dritt. Det jeg skulle si at den tariffavtalen... Hører alle meg nå? Som alle hører nå? Ja. Det som var at den tariffavtalen som kom nå i dag, den der gigantiske, den er veldig positiv for gull. Hvorfor gull åpner ned nå er fordi folk har tjukke i huet, spesielt amerikanere. De tror nå at Europa skal betale tariff til USA. Jeg er bare sånn, hva faen er det de driver med der borte? Jeg har bare lyst til å knuse PC-en, jeg leser det er sånn piss. Her er det amerikanere som må betale 12. De vet ikke at tariff er 12, tydeligvis. De vet ikke, så dollaren kommer til å svekke seg, og gull kommer til å gå opp. Det er det som skal skje. Men problemet her er at folk skjønner jo ikke finans lenger. For her går bare alt opp på at det skal gå opp, fordi Donald Trump sier at alt er så bra og alt er så flott. Det er bare piss. Og den der avtalen, den der EU-avtalen som han har nå, er jo ikke ferdig engang. Det er en jævla rammeavtale. Og det her gjorde han akkurat med Kina for å få opp den der jævla markedet. Den kinesiske avtalen som kom for 1 måned siden, som var så svær at verden hadde aldri sett noe så stort noe før, den er jo ikke i boks ennå. Det er ikke i nærheten engang. Jeg blir så provosert. Så hvor går gull nå? Den åpnet jo faen meg ned med... Hvor mye ned var da? Nesten $20, for den smalt rett opp igjen. Den skulle aldri ha falt. For folk vet jo hva den driver med. Så jeg kjøpte litt mer gull her. Jeg tør ikke kjøpe noe mer på Copper-kontoen, fordi det er flere som har 5000 kroner her, som ikke har puttet opp mer penger. Så jeg bare tar bitte litt. Så jeg sitter i samme møkka selv om det er mange som har puttet opp mer penger. Får ikke tatt noe mer. Det er jo story of my life. Men i hvert fall, avtalen som kom nå med EU er i hvert fall veldig positivt for gull, veldig negativt for dollaren, og det vil egentlig kjøre egentlig, så bør dette her være noe som kommer til å gjøre at amerikanerne må trykke mer penger. Igjen. Så det her er alt annet enn positivt for USA. Jeg vet ikke hvordan Donald Trump klarer å snu det til at det er positivt. Jeg tror sånn han tenker er det at oi, dritbra, det er dyre for amerikanere å kjøpe europeiske varer, så nå skal vi produsere alt i USA. Jeg tror det er sånn han tenker. Han skal ordne mer arbeidsplasser, for det er liksom dyrere å hente inn varer fra Europa. Det er bare piss. Han skjønner jo ikke at du må betale de ansatte penger. Trump blir bare verre og verre for hver jævla uke. Jeg hadde veldig sansen for den i starten. Nå er det bare piss, hele fyren er full av dritt. Han sier kun det han må si for å få ting gjennomført, for at han selv skal tjene penger. Sammen med de der kryptogreiene sine, sammen med den aksjespareklubben til sønnen hans, sammen med den Epstein-greiene. Nå har han liksom satt lokk over det, sier at det bare er piss, og det er jo ikke det. Han gikk til valg på å frigjøre de dokumentene. Nå holder han det tilbake, fordi han er tydeligvis ikke så uskyldig som han sier at han er. Så jeg vet ikke, jeg er bare drit av hele fyren. Og han er mer opptatt av å være på nyhetene enn å faktisk gjøre jobben sin. Så jeg vet faen hva jeg skal si. Uansett i hvert fall, gull bør gå mye opp på den tariffavtalen som kommer nå. Hvis man vet hva man driver med. Og da er spørsmålet om folk skjønner det da. Det er spørsmålet. For det folk også kan reagere på, det er at det blir lettelsesrally i Europa. Det blir lettelsesrally i USA på grunn av avtalen er så stor og fin. For det er det står overskrifter overalt. Hvis du leser den jævla avtalen, så er det ikke noe... Altså, basically så betaler amerikanerne mer enn nå 12 enn hva det gjorde i utgangspunktet. Utgangspunktet var mellom rundt 5 og 0,0. Nå er det oppe på 15. Så er det noen som har vunnet her nå, så er det Europa. Ikke Donald Trump, men han skjønner jo ikke det selv. Han er dum. Han skjønner jo ikke. Det er helt sykt. Men jeg tror han tror oppriktig at det blir dyre tariff på europeiske varer. Nå skal vi lage det i USA. Jeg tror at det er sånn man egentlig tror. Og så driver man bare, vi skal binde europeerne til å kjøpe kraft av oss. Ja, se hvordan det gikk med Kina sist gang, eller? Klønehue. Bare tull. Han er mer opptatt av å lage avtaler og store overskrifter enn å faktisk fullføre dem. Akkurat samme som sist gang han var president. Akkurat samme skitten. Akkurat samme greie. Ja. Skal vi se på euro-dollar da. Ja. Euro-dollar styrker seg noe, men ikke sånn voldsomt. Men styrker seg. Igjen, dette her er bra for gull sånn egentlig. Og Volkswagen falt det med 15 eller 19% på fredag, ikke sant? Det er jo det som er sprøtt, vi skal sitte og trade aksjer basert på hva en klovn skal si fra uke til uke. Det er jo helt tullete. Egentlig bør vi ikke gjøre en dritt. Egentlig bør vi bare vente til han er ferdig. Men han blir jo aldri ferdig. Han har en ny avtale hver jævla uke, og så går han tilbake på alt han sier. Så tror han at jeg skal tro alle med 100% tariff. Og så hele verden bare, hjelp, 100% tariff. Og så går han til 50. Det ble bare 50. Dritbra, nå skal vi gå opp for det ikke ble 100. Bare faens idioter. Jeg blir så irritert. Jeg er ikke med meg negativ, altså. Jeg er bare så lei. Jeg er så dritlei, for ingen skjønner noen ting. Se på aksjemarkedet i USA nå, liksom. Og så klarte han også faen meg å få han ene største kritikeren hans på Showtime fikk sparken på fredag. Han fikk en til å bli cancela, og nå har saksøkeren Wall Street. Og så han oppfører seg som en jævla diktator. Det er jo helt sprøtt. Ja, det kommer om dette her også, men det er liksom sånn hvorfor skal man gidde å bruke tida på å forstå markedet når han kan bare gjøre sånn? Og så er det en ny lov som plutselig kom. Dere fikk med hva han sa om Nvidia forrige uke, eller? Nvidia forrige uke så sa han det at Nvidia har alt for stor markedsposisjon. Det er 70% av hele markedet, Nvidia. 70% av hele markedet, 10% av... mye var det da? Det var 70% av markedet tror jeg Nvidia var. Så 10%, jeg husker ikke hva de siste 10% var. I hvert fall 70% av markedet er Nvidia. Og han mente at Nvidia var alt for stor nå. Han har rett i det. Og mente at den drar markedet for mye, altså for konsentrert. Nvidia nå vekte over 15% her, hvis ikke tar feil. Uansett da, så hadde han en sånn AI-møte, sånn der AI-konferanse som han hadde her på fredag. Da klarte han jævlig å presisere. Hør på dette er ikke kødd engang. Han gikk i det møtet fordi han hadde planer om å dele opp Nvidia i 3. Jeg vet ikke når det var et forsøk på å få revekta det, men deler det til 3. Da ender han opp med å si at han har så sansen for Jensen, Jensen er sjefen i Nvidia, at han skulle ikke gjøre det likevel. For han hadde så sansen for den. Og bare sånn, hæ? Ok, det gir jo mening. Det gir jo jævla mening. Og bare sånn, ok, du er dust, så det skal jeg ødelegge for, og du er kul, så du kan få lov til å få masse avtaler. Elon Musk, jeg liker ikke deg akkurat nå, så nå skal vi kjøre masse sanksjoner på deg. Nei, jeg liker deg overmorgen, så da driter vi deg likevel. Hans klovn, altså. Ja, men ok, tredje gull. Makromessig så er tallene bra for gull. Dollaren skal styrke seg ytterligere, den gjør det her nå, og gull skal gå videre oppover. Euro skal styrke seg, men dollar skal styrke seg. Og så har du det gjeldstaket også, som du må begynne å betale ned på nå, og nå må de også trykke mer penger, som kommer til å brukes på det. Så storyen er helt lik som forrige uke, gull bør gå opp. Og hvorfor gull kom ned i forrige uke var igjen på grunn av Donald Trump og den jævla avtalen med Japan. Og EU. Det er liksom ikke noe nytt. Det er bare piss og det hele tiden. Jeg håper dere skjønner hvor latterlig dette er, liksom. Det er sånn helt kokle munke. Og det som jeg synes er helt sjukt er at europeiske lederne, det er bare flaut å se de intervjuene. Hver gang han sier noe, så ler de liksom bare, Donald Trump, Eneste som har baller å si noe mot Donald Trump er kanaderne. Det er Kanada, liksom. De bare fuck off. Så er det faen meg Jens Stoltenberg og Støre som omtrent sitter der og blower den i møter. Liksom. Det er helt tullete. Og vi tar bare også selger all energien vår billig til utlandet og bare raner nordmenn for alt det har vært. Helvete, ass. Ja, nok rant fra meg. Jeg er bare så drittlei av det som skjer nå. Kom. Er det fellesferie i morgen også? Ja, kanskje? Det er ikke sur på meg. Men dere skjønner tankegangen nå hvorfor dollaren skal ned og euroen skal opp, og hvorfor gull skal opp på grunn av dollaren svekker seg. Dere skjønner greia, ikke sant? Og dere skjønner logikken hvorfor man skal kjøpe gull nå. Så dere som forstår mekanismen i det, liksom. Det er ikke sånn at vi kjøper gull bare for at det datt mye på fredag, liksom. Det har ingenting med det å gjøre. Gull kan gå opp mye mer, jeg hadde kjøpt mer gull. Vi kjøper gull fordi makroen er bra, og fordi det som skjer nå er positivt for gull. Det har ikke noe annet med det å gjøre. Eneste grunn til at jeg solgte gull først på torsdagen før det falt, det var bare fordi det var litt sånn gevinstsikring, og så var det nivåer som man prøvde å ta ut. Og så var det jo Trump som kom til å komme til land, så bare flaks at vi solgte ut der oppe. Jeg trodde da at etter at gull falt med $30, så trodde jeg ikke det skulle falle så mye mer. Så derfor jeg bare kjøpte litt på vei ned. Og har du forstått Martin Gale-style også? Hvorfor det fungerer veldig bra nå? Litt sånn marked som er i nå. Hvordan koppinger nå er det profitabel? Har du vært bortestående? Jeg har vært profitabel. Men vi fikk en liten dropp på fredag. Jeg driver og kjøper på opp nå. Så jeg tror jeg er opp ca. 25% på gull etter alle de psyko-rentene. Så det har gått helt greit. Men det er enkelt som har tredd opp egen hånd, og det kan ikke jeg ta ansvar for. Jo, det som er bra med Martin Gale da, for det første når du skal drive med Martin Gale, ofte når du trader en scalper, sånn som jeg egentlig er da, men jeg har jobbet som, jeg har hodet mitt har satt sammen som forvalter, så hver gang jeg scalper og folk lurer på, hvorfor kan du ikke bare scalpe? Så er det fordi jeg alltid må vite, jeg må alltid vite retningen i markedet, for at jeg skal være komfortabel med å scalpe. Så jeg kan gjøre, som jeg har sagt før, men jeg må ha volum. Jeg kan ikke scalpe på sånn lite volum som det er nå, for nå er alle nervøse. Men det som jeg har lyd på, du hører meg? Ingen som hører meg? Hører meg ikke, Robert? Det er alltid noe kødd med Discord nå, Ja. Jo, det jeg skal si, det som er bra med Martin Gale-style, er det at de blir basically nesten som en sånn slags DCA, basically. Det vil si det at i det markedet som vi har nå, så har vi det er ikke et sunt marked, så du kan ikke handle rent teknisk, og så kan du ikke handle rent funda heller. Du må kjøre en sånn kombinasjon. Og sånn som når jeg vet, fundamentalt, så skal gull opp, men jeg vet ikke hvor den stopper, for jeg ser jo at det er jævla mye nyheter som kommer, og så ser jeg at det er veldig mange som kun handler teknisk. Så er jeg medlem av nå, jeg tror jeg er medlem av sånn 10 sånne gull-telegramgrupper, hvor de har basically ikke peiling. Altså, de aner ikke. De bare sender signaler i huet og ræva, og det er null kontroll. Og de driver også og trader på ett tikk, ikke $1 eller $10, men ett tikk. Det er bare sånn helt kaos. Og da vet jeg at hvis de her som driver på fulltid ikke vet hva de driver med, da vet jeg at det er jævlig vanskelig for meg å treffe bånd og topp. Og det er veldig ordentlig da. Så da bruker jeg noe som heter Martin Gale, det vil si at jeg handler på snitt. Det vil si det at hvis jeg tror gull skal opp, men jeg vet at det kan falle, men jeg vet ikke hvor mye det kan falle, da bare kjøper jeg på vei nedover. Jeg shorter ikke selv om jeg vet det går ned, for det skal egentlig opp. I et marked hvor det er stort volum, så kan jeg gå short selv om jeg vet at det skal opp. Men når det er lite volum, og vi faller på sånne tomrom, så er det så lett at det bare boom, og så går det rett opp igjen, sånn som skjedde på torsdag og onsdag. Ikke sant? Da går den veien den skal egentlig gå, men jeg vet ikke helt hvor nivåene er hen. Så da kjøper jeg på snitter på vei ned. Så det er mange som sier, men faen, vi kommer aldri i pluss. Jo, du kommer i pluss, for det er snittet. Hvis jeg kjøper det her oppe og kjøper det her nede, så er snittet her. Da kan jeg være med opp dit. Da har dratt ned risikoen ganske kraftig. Men hvis jeg hadde shortet på vei ned, når det egentlig skal opp, at jeg går short bare fordi markedet skal ned, fordi folk ikke vet hva de driver med, da risikerer du så driter jeg skikkelig ut. Ikke sant? Så derfor så handler Martin Gale sånn, for jeg synes det er mye mer safer å gjøre det. I et normalt marked, hvor vi har masse volum, da kan jeg gå long short om hverandre hele veien. Men det går ikke akkurat nå. Det er 40% mindre volum i markedet enn hva det var for i fjor. Det er ikke noe... Du kan skylde på ETF-er, du kan skylde på CFD-er, volumet er borte, liksom. Her oppe, når vi er sånn på all time high på alle indekser, så er det veldig vanskelig å finne ut hvor du skal, for du har ikke så mye å gå etter. Så når indekser sånn er på all time high, så er det ikke noe motstand, du vet ikke helt hvilken vei kan du gå, så det er veldig sånn skummelt egentlig. Det er mye lettere og mye safere å trade in range, hvor du har på en måte... hvor du kan på en måte bruke historikk for å finne deg fram da. Og sånn som det er nå, så er vi all time high på gull, nesten, all time high på sølv, all time high på kobber, all time high på Nasdaq, all time high på S&P, all time high nesten på Dow Jones, all time high på Tyskland. Og så har vi resesjon, og så har vi bare bra tall fra USA, men nå er USA i et problem. Nå har de begynt å få svakere dollar og høyere inflasjon. Og Trump vil jo ha ned renta, som vil øke inflasjonen. Og hva vil skje da? Da får du et helvetes problem i USA. Da skal de sette opp renta for å kvele inflasjonen, eller skal de holde renta nede og fortsatt få høyere inflasjon? For Donald Trump skal tjene penger. Så USA nå er et sånt dilemma. Og det er derfor gull også bør gå mye mer også. Bare for grunn av inflasjonen stiger, dollaren svekker seg, safe haven, all time high. Alltid når markedet er på all time high, så går gull og edle metaller går, for det ventes en korreksjon. Pluss at du har faen meg krig igjen. Det blir jo bare dritt. Og Kina nå også har faen meg boligboble til helvete. Men nå ikke Kina tema, for nå det bare tariff. Så derfor så handler jeg Martin Gale akkurat nå. Dere som lurer på hvorfor jeg gjør det. Jeg gjør det fordi jeg synes det mye safere. Mye safere. Så før jeg tredje da, så handlet jeg kanskje 5 og 10 kontrakter på samme kurs. Og så gjorde jeg 5 pips, og så var jeg ute. Kan ikke gjøre det nå. Nå så handler jeg kanskje 2 kontrakter, 1 kontrakt, og så har jeg på mange nivåer for å få snitt da. Hvis det gir mening. Mulig folk helt uenige, men det har i hvert fall gjort at jeg klarer også å tjene penger i et marked som helt kaos, selv om jeg tar feil. Jeg shortet Nasdaq på nytt. Det gir null mening at Nasdaq skal opp på dette. Eller aldri så har jeg en video som kommer til å kjøre opp sikkert.
That you want to exist in 100 years.
Prepina, det mest fornuftige du gjør nå, når det er sommerferie, og du har Trump, det mest fornuftige du gjør nå, ikke gjøre noen ting. Jeg shorter kun fordi jeg syk i huet. Og jeg gjør det på privaten. Så jeg hadde ikke shortet å se det. Jeg gjør det, for jeg vet at Nasdaq er overpriset til helvete. Det har det vært nå et halvt år. Det har ikke falt etter Trump har vært president. Det er helt galskap på meg, jeg har shortet Nasdaq. Men jeg vet at hvis jeg treffer nå, og jeg tåler å sitte lenge i feil vei Nasdaq. Jeg vet at hvis jeg treffer Nasdaq nå, så kommer jeg til å gjøre en bråte med penger. Så må jeg snitte meg ned også, for jeg har så jævlig dårlig inngang. Jeg shortet jo dagen før han forandret loven på Tesla. Jeg var long Nasdaq som faen, og så shortet jeg, og så kom det dagen etterpå. Nei, 2 dager etterpå. Oh, by the way. Vi har gjort om loven på selvkjørende EV for Tesla. Da gikk Tesla opp 30% på 2 dager. Jeg tror gull skal høyt. Jeg tror gull skal til faen meg langt over $200-300 til. Lett. Hvis du tenker situasjonen nå. Tenk situasjonen nå. Det er krig i verden. Alle indekser er på all time high. Trump har selv sagt at han skal ha ned dollarprisen. Han har selv sagt at han skal ha ned dollaren. Krypto er jo på all time high. Det sikreste du kan kjøpe nå, hvis du har litt fornuftig huret, det er gull. Gull og sølv. Det er det eneste du kan kjøpe som ikke blir borte når du slår av strømmen. Det er gull. Ja, det er gull, altså edle metaller da. Gull, aluminium, palladium, eller hva faen heter det for noe, kobber. Nå har jo han satt 50% tariff på kobber også, da har han ikke det? Ja. Nå har jeg penger på shorten min. Jeg bare shortet 2 kontrakter, det er jo ingenting. Ja, men ja. Det eneste jeg ikke liker med markedet som er nå, er det at Trump kan si noe som ødelegger alt. Det er det eneste ikke jeg liker. Men vi gjorde det bra forrige uke, da. Men dere kan ikke høre musikken og høre på ingenting, dere. Skal vi se her nå. Skal vi se om euroen styrker seg. Ja. Den styrker seg. Euroen dollar styrker seg. Det var på 0,09 i stad. Så ser vi gull begynner å gå oppover. Men jeg tror det kan være smart av dere også følge litt med på, så dere får en forståelse av hvordan egentlig dette fungerer, sånn at vær medlem på masse sånne Telegram-grupper, og så se hva andre sier for noe. Så skjønner dere hvorfor markedet er sånn som det er nå. For det er jævla mange eksperter som ikke, de skjønner jo ikke noe selv. Jeg tror det er veldig sunt. Og så høre på andre også, bare, ok, hva er det de, det er liksom, jeg tror det er veldig bra. Ikke han kompisen min, for han har peiling, Prepino. Jeg tenker på andre, så dere kan se hvor mange mennesker som er helt blåst i nøtta, som har flere 100 000 følgere til seg. Altså, de er helt off. Han kompisen som vi snakker om, han heter Driving Markets. Han er en av de flinkeste jeg har sett. Jeg ble tipset av han gjennom en som heter Espen. Du sier gul skam igjen. Jeg sier dette her, jeg har sagt det 100 ganger før. Hvis dere skal på en måte ikke bli påvirket av folk, Det er veldig mange som er veldig sånn nå skal det opp. Og så har det allerede gått opp. Og da kommer det med masse nye nivåer, og det er helt ok. Og hvis markedet da begynner å falle, nå skal det videre ned. Da er de for sent ute. Det er liksom, dere må høre på folk som kommer med det før det skjer. Og så markedet har en tendens til å hente seg inn til slutt. Derfor så må dere ikke få hetta. Jeg kan garantere deg, hvis gull går opp i dag med $50, så kommer det masse sånne telegrafer. Kjøp gull, det skal videre opp. Da kommer de, etter at det har gått opp. Det er det som er vanskelig med aksjer, og vanskelig med det vi driver med, at vi må hele tiden være før det skjer, og da sitter man ofte litt i minus. Men da du kan tjene store penger. Er det litt før? Hvis du alt er på etterskudd, så får du bare mer av slutten. Og så venter du på bekreftelse, og du venter på momentum. Og så kan du gjøre litt penger på det, men det blir ikke noe ordentlig penger ut av det. Det blir liksom en trade eller to. Du får ikke noe sånn der... Eurodolaren styrker seg videre. Men det skjer jo ikke noe her i kveld før klokka 4. Da gull begynner å røre på seg. Om 4, ja. Styrker seg videre. 0,13.
Uken som heldig vinner av dobbler. Følg med, så vil dere skjøtte der Runar Krøvel Vellevold fra Lærvåg i Troms. Du er med oss.
Det er ikke kødd engang.
we do.
Wall Street doesn't think in.
No, they think in like hours. Yeah. And what I've learned of Wall Street, and particularly Wall Street investors, when they say they are long-term investors, that means they'll keep your stock for like a month.
The biggest stars in the world have left their mark on the FIFA World Cup. And whether you call it football or soccer, the world will be watching as new stars are born when the U.S., Canada, and Mexico play host next year. While many of us will be focused on who wins on the pitch, the 16 host cities face a challenge to make sure they win off of it. The FIFA World Cup is one of the biggest spectacles in sport. 48 teams, 104 matches, one winner. Or maybe two. Sure, one team will lift the iconic trophy, but with an estimated $11 billion in revenue coming in, FIFA might be the real winner before a single ball is kicked.
It's the biggest event ever. It's more than 4 billion viewers all around the world, and we will make it the biggest, not only sports event, but the biggest social event that we can think of.
Johnny, we're going to have to extend my second term because 2026, I'm going to have to extend it for a couple of years. I don't think any of you would have a problem with that, but I hope you're going to remember me in 2026.
For sure.
Since the World Cup was awarded to the U.S., Canada, and Mexico during President Trump's first term, 16 host cities have been ramping up infrastructure spending to prepare for the tournament.
I think as a host city, we know this is a big investment.
Sharon Ballenbach is the executive director of the FIFA World Cup 2026 Toronto Secretariat.
Our budget here in Toronto is $380 million, and that has been approved by council. It is, in terms of funding partners, we have significant funding partners from our federal government, as well as our provincial government, and then, of course, the City of Toronto. So it's really all three levels of government are contributing. And the City of Toronto's portion is around $180 million. And much of that comes from so that we can reduce the burden on sort of the tax base. Much of that portion that the city is contributing to the event is coming from some reserve funds. We're putting in place a municipal accommodation tax as a source of revenue for a temporary period over the course leading into the tournament and for the couple of months after. As well, we have a big commercial revenue strategy around bringing in host city supporters and other hospitality sales and opportunities for corporate and other businesses and so on in the city.
Toronto's upgrades include better public transit and the development of training centers, but a sizable portion of the budget is going towards upgrading BMO Field, where Nick Eves is the chief operating officer.
FIFA minimum requirement is to get the stadium up to a 45,500 capacity. Today the stadium holds about 30,000. So we'll be building a temporary 10,000 on the north end, another 7,000 on the south end. The north end structure, in addition to that temporary seating, will also have a permanent 2 levels of hospitality suites, which of course will be usable for the World Cup matches. All of that work must be complete by March in order for us to then go and host some test matches here to really sort of dry run and experience some of this new infrastructure that's been put into place. So on the first phase of construction, we're on schedule. We will be on schedule for the second phase because ultimately we have to hit that March date to host the test matches. And then we need to hand the stadium over to FIFA 30 days from the opening match.
As it turns out, FIFA requires a lot from hosts beyond just stadium capacity. In a published list of government guarantees, FIFA lists the, quote, significant mid- and long-term socioeconomic benefits for host countries, using that to justify a list of requirements that include tax exemptions for the tournament and support in security, public transport, and infrastructure. And it also takes over external advertising spaces. So Toronto's BMO Field becomes Toronto Stadium, and MetLife Stadium becomes New York, New Jersey Stadium.
It's the biggest, broadest, most diverse, kind of far-reaching World Cup there has ever been. And so with that has come a lot of learnings. And I think FIFA have learned a lot, quite frankly, as well, about working with 3 countries, working with 16 host cities. So there's been some things and elements of the agreement and of the requirements that have been laid out from day one. There's been some elements that have shifted, and that's been open dialogue and open communication and an understanding of what are some of the realities that are happening in Toronto that might be different than the realities happening in Vancouver or happening in Los Angeles or happening in New York or Dallas. So there's been some shifts and some ability for us to work together with FIFA to determine what some of those things are. But FIFA definitely, you know, this is their tournament. This is their tournament. They own the property, as it were. And so they will come in, I think it's May, early May, and sort of take over the stadium. They will manage their portions of this tournament and work with us. They understand our budget. They know what our budget is. We've had to push back on some things. You know, there's been some good dialogue on some of the items where we just don't have the budget to maybe meet some of the requirements that have been in place. And so that's been a bit of give and take. You know, what are the primary things that we want to make sure are in place, and what are those things that maybe we can adjust and change a little bit. So that's, again, been an open dialogue. FIFA, I have to say, have been great partners. We've had the ability to really discuss openly some of the elements, understanding it's their tournament, and they've run it for many, many years, as we all know.
And FIFA certainly knows how to make money off of it. The $11 billion in revenue it expects to receive will come largely from broadcast deals, ticket packages, and sponsorships. Andrew Zimbalist is a professor of economics at Smith College and author of Circus Maximus, the economic gamble behind hosting the World Cup and Olympics. There's a good deal of revenue that doesn't come back to the cities who are sponsoring these things. Particularly, it goes to FIFA. What happens to the money to FIFA? Where does that money go?
Well, it goes to making sure that Gianni Infantino has a very comfortable and luxurious life. For one, and his various deputies. But more importantly, the vast majority of the money goes to soccer federations around the world. So each of the participants in FIFA, the International Soccer Association, each of the country participants has a national soccer association, and they're in charge of developing soccer in their country. They spend money for youth soccer programs. They spend money for facilities. They spend money to train referees and officials and so on. So most of the money, the overwhelming majority, probably 90% of the money that is generated for FIFA gets reinvested back into the soccer development worldwide.
So where do the host cities see a return? They get none of FIFA's windfall, but expect to make money through revenue streams like increased tourism, job creation, and global exposure. For Toronto, that's expected to result in $686 million of positive economic output for the greater area, according to a report from Deloitte and FIFA. Adam Van Koeverden is Canada's Secretary of State for Sport and a former Olympic champion in kayaking.
It is a big upfront investment, but we know that it's going to pay off. For example, the federal government is investing $220 million between Toronto and Vancouver to ensure that these 13 games are world-class, safe, and really, really exciting for Canadians. The provincial governments are also coming forward with hundreds of millions of dollars, and the cities are also investing, as are private companies and FIFA especially. So it's an exercise in collaboration, like I said, but the result is a massive positive economic output that Canadians, Canada, Canadian businesses, everybody will see the benefit from that. Likely, we're going to see about $2 billion increase to our GDP, as well as about $3.8 billion, upwards of $4 billion in positive economic output. We're talking about almost 25,000 jobs to be attributed to the FIFA World Cup in 2026. So the economics are very, very sound. It looks like it's going to be a huge boon for Canada's economy, but I'm sure the same is true in the United States and in Mexico as well.
Yet not everyone is convinced.
So you put the costs and the revenues together, you can get a variety of different outcomes, but more likely than not, there's not a financial benefit for the host city. Although virtually every one of the 16 cities in North America will have an increased flow of tourism into the city, virtually every one, I suspect. Very often, the soccer tourists, the soccer fans, replace the normal fans. So somebody who might otherwise be thinking about a trip to Vancouver, Canada, to watch some of the World Cup games might decide, gee, as nice as Vancouver is, and it is a great city, as nice as it is, I'm not going to go there when the World Cup is happening because I'm not going to be able to get a ticket to the game, or I don't want to spend $500 to get a ticket to the game. And so why would I want to put up with the congestion and the higher hotel prices? And so what happens is the soccer tourists substitute for the normal tourists. The normal tourists are the ones that spread the word best about the city. And tourism in cities is best advertised by the actual visitors who come and they go home and they talk to their friends, neighbors, and relatives about what a nice city it is and the different pleasures that they had when they were in the city. If the World Cup tourists are replacing the normal tourists, that's not good for long-run tourism as a general principle. The other thing that's true is that FIFA requires the host city to basically cancel all sales taxes and related taxes on things that are related to the games. If the tourists come to the city and they go to what's called the Fan Fest for the World Cup in the city is required to put on a Fan Fest, and they buy things at the Fan Fest, say they buy food, that's money being spent on hamburgers and hot dogs that's not being spent at a normal tourist restaurant in the city. A normal tourist restaurant in the city will produce sales taxes and revenue for the host city. But if it's being spent at Fan Fest, there are no taxes allowed. Same thing with ticket prices. They're not allowed to charge a sales tax on ticket prices. So the city can actually be losing money because if they were playing a normal sport in the summertime and people were buying tickets, to be a sales tax on that. That would be revenue to the city. But when they're hosting the World Cup, they're not allowed to have that.
There's a lot of talk about long-term benefits.
Generøst av det vi ikke vet. Man skulle egentlig ikke falt på det, men derfor skal være forsiktig.
That in fact it's worth it?
There's always the hope when you host a sport mega event and you're put
Gull skal ikke falle på en svak dollar.
To a degree that you hadn't been before. There's always the hope that there'll be more people around the world who now want to visit your city, and there'll be more companies around the world who now want to trade with them for your products. And there'll be more investors around the world who now want to invest in your city. We don't have any evidence that happens. Those claims have been made frequently. They were made certainly abundantly in the case of London in 2012 when they hosted the Summer Games. But there really isn't any evidence. Good companies don't trade with a city or with a country because they hosted a sport mega event. And they don't invest in a city for that reason. They invest in cities because they have good resources, because they have a good labor force, because they have good fiscal legislation, and because they have good transportation and good location vis-a-vis their markets. And I think that if everything aligns properly, if the city already has the ready-made soccer stadium or stadiums, and they already have the transportation infrastructure and security infrastructure, and FIFA is giving them some of the more interesting games during the course of the World Cup. The revenue side could go up a little bit, and the cost side could be moderated, and at the end of the day, maybe they generate a small surplus.
Ultimately, surplus or not, the World Cup's reach goes far beyond the spreadsheet. And perhaps few know that better than Canada's Olympic champion turned politician.
I know the power of sport. It has the power to change lives for the better. When we invest in physical activity programs and recreation opportunities for young people, for families, and for older folks alike, we get positive social outcomes. But we also see the economic benefits. We see reductions in healthcare costs. We see less of a strain on our judicial system. We see kids happier, healthier, and more connected, and our communities really coming to life. And that's what I expect to see with FIFA. When it comes to town, we're going to celebrate the beautiful game. We're going to celebrate the opportunity to play host for 6 incredible games here in Toronto and 7 across the country in Vancouver. But I know that in every city across Canada, you're going to be celebrating the great game of soccer.
Much has been made in recent years about the booming business of sports, and next year's World Cup looks set to be no different. But perhaps the lasting legacy of a successful tournament won't lie on the bottom line, but what happens inside the white lines. That does it for us here at Wall Street Week. I'm David Weston. See you next week for more stories of capitalism.
Tune in to Bloomberg Business Week Daily.
We got to talk crypto.
From the magazine that helps global leaders stay ahead.
What's the conversation around your company?
Bringing you insight on the people, companies, and trends shaping today's complex economy.
Planning very big things.
A new level of premium.
Plus global business, finance, and tech news as it happens.
The floodgates of innovation are going to open up.
You can't fake passion. You either are or you aren't.
Bloomberg Business Week Daily, only on Bloomberg.
As Bloomberg's global financial correspondent, I get to meet the people shaping the way money flows around the world. And I want to bring you with me. Now we're playing.
Yep, now we're playing. First and foremost, I am a capitalist. The capitalist system is the best system in the world. There isn't another one that works as well.
Citigroup moves $4 trillion a day.
5.
Wall Street used to be a place.
I love all these new Wall Streets. Y'all Street, Wall Street South.
Now it's more of an idea.
The optimism here is infectious.
You think our New Yorkers are negative?
Yes.
Anything that trains people to understand probabilities and just think through things with a greater degree of nuance is a service to humanity.
I hope you survived the day.
I did. It was a busy day.
We're at the epicenter of a global realignment on a scale not seen for decades. At the intersection between markets, economics, and geopolitics, a forum for sophisticated conversation. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
From the beating heart of global finance, economics, and politics, and wherever newsmakers are moving markets, Bloomberg brings you conversations that allow for deep discussions and important insights. What do you think the future is for inflation? Is this new normal? Are markets too optimistic? How do you worry about the things that are outside your control? How does the current fighting completely stop? I'm Francine Lacqua, and this is The Pulse, every weekday only on Bloomberg.
This is the Asia Train. I'm Sherian in Tokyo.
I'm Heidi Stroud-Watts in Sydney. The top stories this hour.
I think it's great that we made a deal today instead of playing games and maybe not making a deal at all. I think it's, I'm going to let you say, but I think it's the biggest deal ever made.
The European Union agrees to a U.S. trade deal with a 15% tariff rate on most exports, including cars, averting what could have been a damaging trade war. The U.S. Treasury Secretary, and Chinese Vice Premier to meet Monday in Sweden, working to extend the truce and widen the discussions. But Friday's tariff deadline is still in focus for investors, with a week of earnings, data and central bank decisions that could define the second half of the year for markets.
And I'm Annabelle Drewlers at the World AI Conference in Shanghai. We'll be hearing exclusively from Alibaba Cloud founder.
Så kan dere spørre, ok, hvorfor ramler det med $20 først?
And the talent war that's shaping up
Ta faen det, folk har tjukke i huet.
in Silicon Valley.
Det er sånn der som pisses me off.
And take a look at how we're setting up in the
Kjøpte der nede, så er det greit nok, men bare sånn,
when it comes to U.S. earnings, we're talking about 40% of the S&P 500 reporting this week, including big tech. And of course, we have the FOMC decision as well. No change expected there, but what we'll be watching is also the Treasury space, because we do have the Treasury's latest views when it comes to quarterly debt sales. And remember, we also do have auctions. It's late in the month, so that could get a little bit complicated. We've also been watching the dollar, and the other side of that trade is the euro, of course.
Det er liksom det er sånn der, man risikerer å gå i stopplås av alt, selv om man har rett, på grunn av Trump som sier noe liksom. Og så skjønner ikke folk hva det betyr.
We had seen that 1% gain in the last week as well. Take a look at how the Japanese yen is also trading, because we had seen a little bit of strength against the US dollar. In fact, when it comes to Japanese stocks, we saw those gains and that incredible rally. Guys, switch up the board and you can see how Nikkei futures are setting up, because we have...
Er vi heldige nå, så går gull i taket, liksom.
Territory for the topics, at least above that 70 level. So we'll be watching whether there is a little bit more risk going forward. Nikkei futures at the moment, though, gaining ground. And you have the Bank of Japan, of course, later this week, also coming out with its rate decision. Not really much expected there. Japanese yen holding at that 147 level. And the offshore yuan, a little bit of marginal strength against the US dollar. Remember, Heidi, we have seen the yuan pretty strong. An 8-month high. We did get industrial profits, so falling for a second month.
And some of that risk appetite share also depends on what happens between the US and China, right? Whether this trade truce gets extended. US and Chinese negotiators set to meet in Stockholm later on Monday. A third round of talks now aimed at extending that tariff détente, if you will, and widen the discussions to include Chinese oil purchases.
Så går den forbi der hvor det var i forgårs.
Correspondent Min Min Lo, who joins us out of Hong Kong. So, I mean, we're hearing reports that potentially we see an extension of another 90 days. What are we expecting going into this round of talks?
Yeah, the bar is already quite low.
Det er ikke noe håpe, det er bankers. Vi driver ikke med betting. Eller Trump holder på, så føles det som betting.
Whether or not there will be any further sort of even minor achievement or symbolic achievement beyond that, I think that will be a win for both sides. But of course, this is a third round of trade talks led by He Lifeng from the Chinese side and Scott Bessent from the US side. Possibly one of the more meaningful rounds of trade talks, given the first two was really focused on stabilizing the economies and bringing down the tariff levels from the triple-digit level. But this time, it could focus on deeper issues. China, for example, has been complaining about these tech curb and restrictions and has been saying that by easing these restrictions, it would allow China to buy more goods that would reduce the trade deficit that the U.S. has with China. And meanwhile, the U.S. will likely raise the issue of China's industrial overcapacity, the shifting towards a consumption-led economy. But if the two sides commit to a truce and agree not to impose further tariffs in the next 90 days, that would, of course, create a favorable atmosphere for a potential meeting between the two leaders, President Trump and President Xi, potentially in October at the sidelines of the APEC summit in Korea. But I'm particularly watching for when or if the U.S. does announce these sectoral tariffs on things like semiconductors and pharmaceuticals. What happens then, and will that trade truce still hold? But we'll see how the talks go over the next couple of days.
How much does Beijing need this when we continue to see that pressure on the economy there?
Yeah, they do need it because the tariffs have, of course, been crimping on industrial profits, and we are seeing profits down for a second straight month, down by 4.3% in the month of July compared to the previous.
Kinas industritall nå har droppet 4,9% de to siste kvartalene. Altså snart resesjon igjen.
Importance of reining in this, what the government is calling disorderly low-price competition. The government has pledged to phase out some of these outdated industrial capacity. But it's going to be a very position for China because that will likely mean job cuts. And for now, you know, these companies, they are, as they look for other markets outside the U.S., the competition within China is becoming more intense, and that's why the government has been summoning the food delivery platforms, calling them to rein in their promotions, for example, stepping up price investigations into the EV sector. But this, again, a concern around the vicious cycle there. If profits are down for companies, they will be more reluctant to hire and to invest, and then that has an impact on consumer sentiment as well.
Bloomberg's China correspondent Min Min Lo there with the latest as we continue to watch this new round of US-China talks. In the meantime, the US and the EU striking that trade deal imposing a 15% tariff on most EU exports, including cars. As part of this pact, the bloc will ramp up purchases of American energy and boost investment in the US while sidestepping President Trump's threat of steeper levies.
We've reached a deal. It's a good deal for everybody, I believe. And I think you were saying this is probably the biggest deal ever reached in any capacity, trade or beyond trade.
It is.
It's a giant deal with lots of countries.
Let's bring up Bloomberg senior editor Wendy Benjaminson, who joins us now from Washington. And Wendy, we sort of had a prelude to this, almost the sort of Japan deal blueprint, right, of the 15%. President Trump has said this would be the lowest point where he would negotiate from. So is it the biggest of all deals, as the president says?
Well, I think he's referring to the fact that the the U.S. and the EU, together are the two largest economies in the world. So I believe that's what he's talking about. But of course, the president usually speaks in a lot of hyperbole. But it is a big deal, and it settles. Not everyone in Europe is happy with it, but it does seem to settle, the arguments over whether tariffs should be 15% or 30%. Of course, when you look at the fine print, there are some other numbers in there. For example, steel will still be at a 50% tariff. The president said that the EU would open its markets to U.S. automobiles, but U.S. automakers would have to adjust their cars to fit that market. And so it's not quite as easy as he made it sound.
The Italian Prime Minister called this deal sustainable, but it seems some industry groups in Europe are not too happy.
That's right. There was a German industry group that worried about the effect of jobs, and there will be some people who, think that it's because it changes the balance of trade between the two groups, the U.S. and the EU, where the EU had charged the U.S. much more than the U.S. was charging it. Now that has rebalanced. The US is charging 15%.
Bøg, og hva faen det man spilte så masse? Det null grunn til at den skal falle. Hvis den faller, så det fordi folk ikke helt skjønner, og så vil den rettes opp igjen. Det null grunn til at gull skal falle nå. Da det bare støy og trade, så folk skjønner ingenting.
A lot of talking also between Washington and Seoul. We are now hearing from South Korean media, Tongailbo, saying that South Korea is actually considering U.S. rice imports.
Eneste kan kjøre gull ned hvis det kommer en melding fra noen AI eller et eller annet, og Nasdaq går i taket. Det eneste et eller annet AI, et eller annet. Ellers så skal ikke gull ned.
Ikke det Nasdaq noe jævlig opp med det begynte med.
Nasdaq går hver dag.
Og den du shorta?
Ja, jeg shorta den her.
Ok, har du den, ja?
Ja, jeg har ikke gjort den.
Det blir bangt på nå, snart.
Jeg føler når jeg shorter Nasdaq, så føler jeg at jeg shorter, det liksom en lide. Det har ingenting med Nasdaq å gjøre. IBM var ned 10% på fredag, tror jeg det var. Rørte ikke på Nasdaq i det hele tatt. Mattel var ned, jeg vet ikke hvor mange prosent. Rørte ikke Nasdaq i det hele tatt. Tesla var ned 9% på torsdag. Rørte ikke Nasdaq.
Sets of negotiations. What's the strategic thinking, do you think, from the White House? Yeah.
Right. Well, earlier this past week, the Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said he expected the talks to be suspended, or it to be pushed back another 90 days. So I think it is just because China is such an important.
Jeg shorter faktisk 5 kontrakter nå, jeg doblet dem. Lærer aldri. Jeg må ha den under 70 for at det skal være noe pluss. Alt over så går jeg minus.
Snart å begynne å komme ned, ja.
There with the latest on those ongoing trade negotiations coming up on the Asia trade. UBS discusses the global scramble for U.S. trade deals ahead of Friday's deadline. Plus, we'll be live at the World AI Conference in Shanghai, unpacking the future of artificial intelligence with the CIO of tech investor Monolith Management.
But first, our exclusive interview with the Alibaba Cloud founder, Wang Jian, about the future of AI in China. That's next. This is Bloomberg.
Gap och framåt är poäng.
Bringing you up-to-the-minute energy news whenever and wherever it happens. I'm Joanna Bercecci in Vienna, and this is Bloomberg.
At a time when policy in Washington is driving Wall Street, we draw a distinction between the rhetoric and the action, bringing you market-moving guests and original reporting. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Asia is at the forefront of some of the world's biggest stories. I'm Shevrian in Tokyo.
And I'm Heidi Stroud-Watts here in Sydney, where the trading day begins. We're here in the center of all the action to get you set up with the numbers, news and knowledge you need for the day ahead.
Sånn går det når du skriver artikler om deg selv.
We've been waiting for this moment. The opportunity of a century.
Join us on Bloomberg The Asia Trade. Weekdays only
Ta les det der.
Context changes everything.
From the world of politics to the world of business, Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lines deliver news, insight, and analysis live 2 times a day, every trading day. Balance of Power at 1 and 5 Eastern, only on Bloomberg. Wednesday, the Fed decides.
It's not just about the economics, it's about the politics.
The Fed is in policy purgatory.
It's going to press on the dual mandate. If the Fed wants to maintain its credibility, I think it makes sense to stay where they are right now.
Trust Bloomberg to bring you the fastest coverage and exclusive analysis, including Powell's press conference.
He's under fire. They're coming out of the trenches after him.
How do they justify how this is not political?
Tune in to Bloomberg Surveillance. The Fed decides, starting at 1:30 p.m. Eastern.
Premier Li Qiang says China will lead the creation of an international AI organization to ensure the technology does not remain in the hands of a few nations. He made the announcement at the World Artificial Intelligence Conference in Shanghai. Bloomberg's Asia tech correspondent Annabelle Drewlers joins us from there. And Belle, I mean, the premier didn't necessarily name any country specifically, but it seems that the tech tensions were looming large.
Yeah, I think you can sort of read between the lines on exactly where that sort of sentiment was headed and directed, and specifically at the US, which, as you said, he didn't mention explicitly, but still, the tagline of this event is global solidarity in the AI era. So, and as you said, that was really the tone that Premier Li Qiang struck during his opening address for the World AI Conference. Yes, there's the risk of job losses. Yes, there's the risk of global upheaval, but that's also why he says that nations do need to work together. And also, to your point around this new initiative that's being launched, why China also announced that they're launching a new initiative called the World AI Cooperation Organization. That's about countries being able to share AI talent, insights, and also some of their initiatives. Now, whether that is really the message that lands with the US is certainly another matter, but it does tell you that is where competition is currently headed. It's not just around who can come out on top and really dominate in AI infrastructure, and we see the US really ahead of that in that, of course, but also who can set AI governance and standards around the world. And China is making a very big focus on the global south in particular. It's where a lot of their attention is currently headed.
But the weekend, tell us a bit more about that conversation.
Yes, I had the opportunity to speak with the Alibaba Cloud founder, Dr. Wang Jian. This is the person that really built out Alibaba's cloud ambitions from just like a handful of servers supporting the e-commerce industry or sector of the business into really the industry behemoth that it is today. Wong is certainly a very deep thinker. He didn't really want to be drawn too much into the tensions between the US and China, but certainly we did talk about the role that China can play globally in terms of governance, and he says that that can be a role, and also spoke about the significance of that. It was a very wide-ranging conversation over about an hour. We also had the chance to speak about the talent wars that we see in Silicon Valley, where they're spending hundreds of millions of dollars is what he says is the right approach, and also as well about how the AI competition landscape is shaping up in China, and the different direction that it's assuming as well. But take a listen to the highlights.
I would say as just like a single organization or single person, you really cannot go that fast for a long time. Okay, you collapse. Okay, like I can work in like for 3 days and without any sleep, but not anymore. Okay, not anymore. And you really cannot like work 30 days and don't have any sleep. Okay, no way you can do that. Okay?
Work ethic in China.
But I would say collectively, we can have a very fast iteration. Okay, like so that's why I really like a stubborn mindset. So basically, like DeepSeek could do something very fast. Okay, and then we also have Queen. Okay. And then we have Kimi, okay. So collectively, and we can push that fast. I think that's okay. Actually, that's what I think it's important. Otherwise, why we need that population, okay? So that's why when people get together, and it's not just for competition, whether you win or not. It's basically you can have the very fast iteration of the technology because of this competition, or because and you work fast this time and you slow a bit, and then other guy move very fast, and eventually we slow down a bit. And if you're good enough, you can catch up again. And I don't think it's brutal, but I think it's very healthy because and when we work with the people that is very competitive, that would make you much more competitive, because that was the way how I think the new technology will be invented.
Yeah, you're talking, I guess, about more of a marathon, not just a sprint race.
Yes.
Is there space, though, for new contestants to enter that race today?
I would say, at least for AI, it's a marathon, because I think nobody could really see, if it's a long journey. It's definitely in the very beginning, okay.
I think something that we see right now is certainly money that's being directed at strong talent.
Yeah.
And there's stories, of course, in Silicon Valley we see of people that are getting hundreds of millions of dollars. And what do you think about that?
Man tar selv Nasdaqen, da virker som den skal ned.
Let's see. It's a typical way of doing things. Okay, I would say that. The reason is very simple. With one example, when I started
Nå trykk oppover, ja.
Alibaba Cloud, the first thing I did.
Det var noe trykk oppover, ja.
Det er det alltid på Nasdaq, samme faen hva som skjer.
And to try to get talent, okay. And after talking to all the people, and you realize actually we don't have much talent there because it's new.
Okay.
So, and also with some of the talent, it's just too expensive, okay. And too expensive basically means, okay, you don't know whether the cloud business is there. Why need to hire these people? So it's really about innovation. So when you're in the early stage of innovation, I don't think talent is a problem, because the only thing you need to do is to get the right person, not really the expensive person. Because if it's a new business, if it's true.
De har gjort noe med chartene, ja. Begge er en oppdatering, for nå går det an å flytte rundt chart.
Hva sier du ramler ut hele tida? Hva har vi sagt nå?
Jeg sier at de har gjort noen ting med chartene i oppdateringen.
Ok, at det er bedre?
Ja, du får til å bevege deg rundt.
That's my view, okay. So I think we have a tremendous
opportunity
to look at technology nobody knows today.
Jeg har på TradingView opp når jeg er inne på der.
But these are, I can't say it's cheap, but it's available for you, okay? So that's really about the vision, where you want to go. And there's a lot of similar things, happened during the last 20 years also. Whenever everybody knows that these are talent, and it's better for you not to get in. And at least that's not new. That's my so like personally that I hired the Zhou Jin now. He's the leader for the Queen. Okay, you probably met him, when you're in Hangzhou. I personally interviewed him. 15 years ago, and we got talent. Now he's leading the Queen. Yeah, but so that's.
So there's not really any justification, then it sounds like you think for such huge salaries.
That's not what the I'm sorry. What happened in Silicon Valley is not the winning formula. That's what I believe. Yeah.
That was the Alibaba Cloud founder there, Dr. Wang Jun, speaking exclusively to us on Bloomberg Television. As we said, it was a very wide-ranging conversation. It lasted for an hour, so plenty more insights, and we're going to get, of course, a lot of those coming up as well. But just some of the key points he made in addition is that he's saying that really OpenAI and ChatGPT has created sort of a bias in the market, sort of skewed people's perceptions about what AI can do. And he really says moving forward in the years to come, there's going to be a lot more innovation that looks a lot different as well.
Bloomberg's Asia Tech correspondent Annabelle Drewler's there showing us some of those changes occurring also in Shanghai from that artificial intelligence conference. And you can watch also more on this interview later on the China Show at 10:30 a.m. Hong Kong time, and subscribers can check it out on the terminal and Bloomberg.com. Still ahead, that World AI Conference coverage continues with an exclusive interview with Monolith Management's co-founder and CIO, who shares his vision for the future of artificial intelligence in China. This is Bloomberg.
Welcome back to the circuit. This time, we're taking you to the frontier.
23.400 nå på Nasdaq.
Stargate, put that name down in your books. What we're undergoing right now is sort of the largest infrastructure build in human history.
To meet the people rewriting the rules of code and culture.
How do you personally grapple with the pace of it all?
Det er ganske utrolig.
It's going very fast.
When did you realize, oh my gosh, my life is never going to be the same?
The day I got engaged, I was like, whoa, what have I bitten off here?
Where the future gets real.
How confident are you that AI's promise will outweigh the perils?
I'm not confident.
So the tech companies are lying or fudging.
And a little weird.
What's the point of this?
What is the point of any of this?
Tune into Season 3 of The Circuit with me, Emily Chang. Thursdays at 6 p.m. Eastern on Bloomberg Originals and Bloomberg TV.
Starter med AI. Med Oldtime.
Ja, det er som jeg har sagt, at jeg vet ikke om Nasdaq kommer til å falle noen ganger. Det er liksom, det er så sentrert. Liksom, Nvidia må ned, eller så får du ikke Nasdaq ned. Altså når Tesla var ned 9% i forrige år, så rørte ikke Nasdaq på seg.
Other stories that we're following this hour, the leaders of Thailand and Cambodia will
meet on
Monday in Malaysia
for a kjøpe en hedge, jeg bare nuller,
President Trump threatened to withhold trade deals unless both sides ceased hostilities. A border conflict that broke out last week has become Southeast Asia's deadliest in a decade. More than 30
det er ikke noe volum heller, det er bare sånn
50,000 displaced. Trump says his pressure campaign pushed the countries to seek a ceasefire. Taiwan's Kuomintang party has survived a mass recall vote, keeping control of the island's legislature. The recall effort was driven by civil groups accusing the KMT of collaborating with China, but was overwhelmingly rejected by voters. President Lai Ching-te's Democratic Progressive Party says it will review the results, claiming that Beijing has been interfering in Taiwan's affairs. Israel has resumed limited humanitarian aid to Gaza, easing restrictions over the weekend after a mounting global outcry over hunger in the enclave. The Israeli military has paused some operations to allow UN convoys in and restored power to a water desalination plant. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer will meet with President Trump in Scotland on Monday to discuss a lasting ceasefire in Gaza. More to come here on the Asia Trade. This is Bloomberg.
Snacks, Alex. Så godt.
Bringing you up-to-the-minute geopolitical news whenever and wherever it happens. I'm David Gura in Alberta, Canada, and this is Bloomberg.
Good morning. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Welcome back to the opening trade.
Watch Bloomberg Tech.
This is the Asia Trade.
This is Wall Street Week. Welcome to Balance of Power.
This is Bloomberg Television.
Right, okay, ready?
David, what initially sparked your interest in this topic of longevity?
15 years ago, I turned 60, and I began to wonder how much longer I'm likely to live and what I could do to extend my life. On longevity, I talk with the leading experts in science and medicine to educate people about how they might be able to change their conduct so that they can live a happier and healthier life. I'm David Rubenstein. Join me on a 4-part journey as I explore the great quest for longevity. Only on Bloomberg.
Get your fixed income fix. Watch Bloomberg Real Yield around the world right here on Bloomberg. Context changes everything.
Take a look at the week ahead, and trade is taking center stage again. President Trump's deadline for the U.S. tariff pause set to end on Friday. U.S. and Chinese officials are also meeting on Monday to try and extend that tariff truce beyond that mid-August deadline. Aside from trade, also watching central bank decisions. The Fed expected to hold rates on Wednesday, despite President Trump's repeated calls for cuts. That rate decision coming ahead of the Friday U.S. jobs report that could show an uptick in unemployment. Closer to home here in Asia, Singapore's monetary authority is seen maintaining its policy settings when it meets on Wednesday. The Bank of Japan is also expected to hold rates steady on Thursday. This is a picture when it comes to trading in FX at the moment. This has, of course, a lot of cross currents, many of them positive when it comes to these trade developments, and certainly one to watch when it comes to trading in dollar yuan is how this next set of Stockholm talks go between the US and China. We're hearing reporting that potentially there will be that extension of another 3 months of that trade truce to give a little bit more time for what is undoubtedly some of the most complex trade negotiations in this picture. Dollar yen is trading at about that high 147 level, and taking a look at the euro as, of course, we've seen the EU and the US reaching that 15% tariff deal. Let's take a look at how investors are digesting all of this. Garfield Reynolds, who leads our Markets Live Asia coverage, is with us more. So, look, a lot of assuring news certainly is happening.
Yeah, this is very much the playbook that investors were expecting and had been expecting, for a while. We had the modest shock and awfulness of the letters when they came out with the, this is what you get, followed fairly rapidly by a trickle of deals where countries got significantly less, less than was in the letters and certainly significantly less than had been in the Liberation Day announcements. And that trickle has turned into something of a flood, with Japan last week and now the EU this week getting 15% across the board, including very, very sort of welcome on that front for those economies. 15% also applying to cars. Autos had been a major sticking point where the Trump administration had been setting 25% on cars and on car parts. Instead, we're getting 15% on cars at the very least, and that's a positive. There's also been this coming to the fore, these investment deals, so to speak, and also commitments to buy more US products, though in a lot of cases those products were likely to be bought anyway. Energy, Europe is trying to wean itself from any lingering dependence on Russia. That pretty much requires them to buy US oil and gas. Also, Trump is saying that they are promising to buy lots and lots more weapons. Well, they were already going to be doing that in order to meet those increased NATO commitments. So there's a lot of vague stuff that is supposed to be better for the US, that's supposed to be a win for the US. Ultimately, though, investors are going to focus on the idea that, at least in the short term, the trade war rhetoric has been dialed right down. The impact in particular to other economies is smaller than it would otherwise have been. The EU, remember, was being threatened with as much as 50% at one stage and 30% more recently. So that's good news, provided that we don't get any fresh volatility as the deals get ironed out or not. We've already got some back and forth about what role pharmaceuticals will play. Investors are going to be mostly welcoming of this, but they're also going to be very focused on what does the Fed bring, what's going on with the US economy, as Heidi was mentioning, those earnings that are coming. It is a very, very big week, and to some extent investors are now going to be able to look past the trade wars to the fundamentals as they are becoming apparent in the here and now.
No change expected from the FOMC, none from the BOJ either, but we are watching sovereign debt markets. We do have auctions in the U.S. We have the Treasury with its views of quarterly debt sales.
Yes, we do. And we also have, of course, these days, central bank guidance is a dirty word almost, but we will have those indications of what is or is not coming next. There's the potential that the BOJ in particular will, now that the trade situation has become calmer, make it clearer that it is biased to hike rates sooner rather than later. And if it doesn't, then that would be a big risk for the long end. We saw declines in long end yields for JGBs at the end of last week on the potential for BOJ hikes. So that's something to watch. In the US, the action is more towards the other end, in that while there's been some signals that there will be dissent, overall the tone from the majority, and including Jay Powell, has been more towards holding rates for the moment because they're worried about the impact of tariffs on inflation. That impact is becoming apparent, and there's also the impact of this drumbeat of criticism of the Fed that from the government that it should be cutting rates, which paradoxically makes it harder for the Fed to cut rates because it doesn't want to be seen to be giving in. So given that commentary, given what their concerns about inflation, the Fed is really going to need to see a major deterioration in data before it says, okay, we're going to cut rates, which means that the data that comes out after the Fed, the jobs report, that will do a lot, at least for how rates traders position themselves going forward. Whether we're going to see just one cut this year, or whether we're going to see two. A lot of that's going to depend on the data, along with this volatility-inducing potential from what the FOMC says in and after the meeting, and how Trump and Bessent and Lutnick respond to that, and whether we get this continuation of the conflict between the US government and the US central bank, a conflict that cements the down path for the US dollar.
Bloomberg's Garfield Reynolds there with some of the big questions that we're watching, perhaps beyond just the policy settings from the Fed this week. But take a look at how all of this, the trade cross currents is playing into the picture for commodities. Brent crude up by just about 0.1%. We did see some weakness as we saw the dollar strengthening, conviction really waning that the US will kind of reach the agreements. But of course, now we have had that securing of the 15% tariff pact with the EU, and potentially also an extension of the deadline with a trade truce with China as well. Iron ore off by just about 1.3%. Some concerns over those industrial production numbers out of China, despite, of course, some of that sort of rebalancing when it comes to steel-making capacity in China still underway. We're also seeing gold off by just about 0.2% at the moment. Most metals at the moment are kind of drifting a little bit lower as we get into a very risk-heavy week, particularly when it comes to monetary policy. More ahead on the Asia trade. This is Bloomberg.
Morning, this is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. I'm Tom McKenzie in London. These are the stories that set your agenda.
Taking you from the U.S. markets close to the overnight session in Asia, we'll walk you through what you need to know to kickstart Europe's trading day. Live from our European headquarters, we bring you the day's top market-moving stories, unmatched expert analysis, and on-the-ground reporting from across the continent. Tune in to Daybreak Europe, only on Bloomberg Television. Context changes everything. Why do the biggest names in business choose Bloomberg Television?
That's a great question.
It's a very good question.
Interesting question. Good question. Great question. I so appreciate that question. You certainly ask interesting questions.
Bloomberg Television. Top experts, great questions.
Join me each week on Wall Street Week for stories of capitalism from business, markets, economics, tech, and climate. More than what you need to know, it's what you need to think about.
Take a look at how Japanese assets are setting up for the market opens in about 20 minutes. We do have the Bank of Japan policy decision. No change expected this week after the U.S. and Japan already struck a trade deal. Of course, we have seen Japanese stocks really gaining ground on that decision. The RSI on the topics already in the overbought territory. But what we'll be watching also, of course, is the political landscape in Japan. Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba says he won't step down despite mounting pressure from within his party after bruising upper house election. Ishiba insists he must stay to oversee the new U.S.-Japan trade deal. However, a new Nikkei poll suggests his cabinet's approval rating has slipped 5 points to 32%. Let's bring in Bloomberg opinion columnist Garode Reedy. Garode, so how much does this really matter to Prime Minister Ishiba? He was never a popular prime minister, and it took him so long to get here.
Yeah, it's maybe that's one of the reasons that he's digging in for so long. As you say, he spent a long time, his entire political career really, at becoming prime minister, running 5 separate times to be leader of the Liberal Democratic Party. He's really digging in now. You mentioned there the Nikkei poll, and there was other polling that saw his numbers drop, as we would expect. There was also a very odd poll yesterday from the Mainichi that saw his cabinet approval rating go up despite the election defeat, and also listed him as the person most suitable to be prime minister. In other words, people responding to the poll were saying that he should stay on as prime minister. It's a very confusing situation right now in Tokyo. I can't recall seeing something like this where we saw multiple media reports that suggested basically that his resignation was imminent. And he himself is digging in and saying, he's not going anywhere. It's quite an extraordinary situation, and I think it's going to continue to be a point of focus over the next coming weeks until we get some sort of clarity about his future.
And that sort of suggests that it could swing in many ways, right? How much does it also depend on exactly what we actually see in the details of this trade deal?
I think that might be one of the things that is in focus. Is Ishiba wants to stay on, so he gets these details ironed out. You know, there does seem to be, despite the agreement last week, there seems to be a huge gap in between the expectations on both parties' sides, or at least what they're saying in public about what they believe the agreement was. Ishiba, may want to continue to use this as an excuse as well to stay on and say, well, despite the election defeats, this is the deal that I have negotiated, so I need to stay on until we have something in writing. We see in I think in a lot of these deals there's a big gap, a comprehension gap between the two sides, and I think when it comes to Ishiba, we're going to have to see where it goes and whether he's even still in power now. The LDP may try to remove him using a recall process, basically to choose a new leader. So he might ultimately not have all the power in this matter. We'll have to see if he's able to stay on and iron out these details with the Trump administration.
Bloomberg opinion columnist Garode Reedy there with the latest on the political landscape here in Japan. We're also, of course, following the tech landscape. Children of the 80s and 90s would remember the logo of TDK during the era of cassettes when the company dominated the magnetic tape space. And, well, that technology is now just a relic of the pre-digital era. TDK is hoping to remain at the forefront of tech innovation. Through its 7C strategy, the company remains a major player in designing and manufacturing components from batteries to sensors that enable the latest technologies. I spoke to CEO Nobuhiro Saito and began by asking how they're seeing the trade deal between the U.S. and Japan.
We will need to understand more in details about this particular, Japan case. And of course, we'll need to keep monitoring the other cases, not only limited to Japan, but also the other countries.
At least is it a brighter outlook than when you told us earlier this year that you could take an operating profit hit of about 10% for fiscal 2026 year on year because of the uncertainty, partly related to tariffs?
Yeah, it's first time for a company TDK that we made two scenarios that facing this kind of a very dynamic situation. But I hope that the impact is going to be minimized, but it's actually out of our control.
Have you seen the impact so far?
A little bit.
What costs are we talking about? Demand globally?
Actually, overall, I cannot pick up only one. That kind of impact, is kind of on broader basis. Right.
Should I assume that's also a lot to do with China because more than 50% of your revenue comes from China?
China is one of the our major business, market. But again, as I said, we're doing business on a global basis.
China-U.S. tech rivalry continues, and we know that when it comes to TDK, you do have subsidiary Amperex assembling batteries in China. Have you heard any concerns about China-made parts?
Yeah, actually, even before we started facing this situation, that we have been proceeding our kind of strategy about the production site called China Plus. China for TDK remains extremely important market for the future as well. But in addition, we have already started, expanding our production site of battery into India.
The new factory in India is supposed to go online in September. Is that on track?
On track, yes.
What are you seeing as the ratios between production and demand when it comes to India versus China?
At this moment, India much smaller.
Artificial intelligence, of course, is very important for TDK, especially when you want to grow the ecosystem around AI. How does the China market play into that? Because China seems to be a very isolated case when it comes to tech development and AI as well, as opposed to the rest of the world.
We see this AI, market as an AI ecosystem. Not only these, popular applications, but also like a smartphone or ADAS in automotive. Such kind of the wider scope of the application we are defining like AI ecosystem, which will be positively contributing to the transformation of society.
Because you have a new generation of batteries to power these smartphones as well for AI tasks, right? And your biggest consumers are Apple and Samsung. So tell us a little bit about how that market is growing right now for TDK and how important that is.
The development of data traffic in the smartphone, that the higher energy density battery, will be more and more required. That's kind of trend, I see. Therefore, with our, unique kind of technology, we will be able to make a bigger contribution to this growing, demand.
Is that why you're adopting also a strategy of buying out more companies that are in a way related to artificial intelligence? I understand that you recently acquired SoftEye, for example, which also deals with smart glasses.
Mm-hmm. This SoftEye, which we newly acquired, is providing kind of the eye tracking and also object, recognition, together with, ultra compact battery, several sensors, electronic components, plus such kind of the, very differentiated with ultra low power, solution is going to contribute a lot also to develop this, future growing, applications.
When it comes to developing these new technologies, where are your R&D centers as well, and how much are you investing in trying to get all of this brain power for these new innovations?
TDK, keeps investing 10% for R&D. Not only looking at the short term, but also looking at long term. So new product or new technology, which will be growing in the long term, also will be contributing to the huge problem, looking on this AI ecosystem development, power consumption is a huge challenge or problem in the coming future. But for us, TDK, this power consumption, the challenge is an opportunity.
TDK CEO Noboru Sato, they're speaking with Sherry earlier. We do have some breaking news when it comes to the CK Hutchison development, saying that they may invite a Chinese investor to join their port deal. CK Hutchison remaining in discussions with members of the consortium with a view to inviting a major strategic investor from China to join as a significant member of the consortium. That's according to its latest HKX filing. And we have seen sort of regained enthusiasm from investors for CK Hutch, despite that delay that we've seen in the company's plans to sell ports. That optimism has been fueled by news that some investors, including the likes of China COSCO Shipping, are finding its way into that global deal. So that possible involvement is perhaps what we're seeing that sort of alluding to in this latest HKX filing. CK Hutch remaining in discussions with members of the consortium. The view is to invite a major strategic investor from China to join as a member of that consortium. Sherry.
We now have breaking news also on Samsung. We're now hearing that it signed a 22.8 trillion won chip manufacturing deal with a client. We don't have more details than that, but we know that Samsung, of course, has suffered when it comes to chip manufacturing, especially when it comes to advanced semiconductors. Its profit fell for the first time since 2023. We're talking about a 56% plunge in operating income for the June quarter, although it's been reasserting its position as the top Korean stock, with its share rising about 10% in July. And we are now hearing from sources that Samsung has signed a 22.8 trillion won chip manufacturing deal with a client. We have more ahead. This is Bloomberg.
Jumpstart your trading day on Bloomberg Open Interest.
2 hours of single stock stories that are driving the opening bell action.
We'll take you to Wall Street, Main Street, the C-suite, and beyond.
These are companies that are growing their market.
The great companies in the U.S. are the companies hitting the cutting edge. That's a different story.
Get the inside track on what's buzzing in markets.
With the players who are shaping the narrative.
If you have bad earnings reports, you're going to get punished.
They're not buying what the industry is selling. Join us on Bloomberg Open Interest every trading day, only on Bloomberg.
What is going to be the consequence for U.S. markets?
We are basically deep in the European earnings season.
Take a look at how we're faring when it comes to Asian markets.
Welcome back. Already this year's best performing major market, South Korean stocks are becoming a magnet for foreign investors thanks to regulatory reforms. Asia Equities reporter Sang-Mi Cha joins us now with the latest. And Sang-Mi, what a difference just a few months makes, especially after the presidential election with more clarity on the political landscape. What are we seeing in terms of inflows?
Yeah, well, the overseas funds that had dumped Korean stocks over the past 9 months have piled back in, starting in May and June. They have bought about 2.9 billion, and in July alone, we're seeing about 3 billion that they have added. So we're seeing this trend that all the foreign investors are coming back to Korea after the martial law, the challenge that they have experienced, and then obviously after the June election, that is actually boosting the markets right now. We see some of the Wall Street banks like JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, and Citigroup all upgraded Korea stocks starting from June, and JP Morgan has actually put out a very bullish sentiment where they said that they expect Kospi, the benchmark Kospi, to reach 5,000 over 2 years. That's from 3,200 levels that we're seeing right now. That actually echoes that ambitious goal the current administration actually has to actually boost Kospi to 5,000, and they have come up with an ad hoc committee called Kospi 5,000 to actually tackle that. And all this goes back to the idea of resolving Korea discount. Korean companies are undervalued relative to their peers in Japan or Taiwan precisely because of that poor corporate governance that has been a long overdue issue. And obviously that is because of that weak shareholder rights. And so there's that optimism now that this government is actually serious about tackling that Korea discount.
So what are we expecting when it comes to the next rounds of reforms?
Well, in the beginning of this month, we've seen the first round of revision to the commercial code pass, and that has allowed the fiduciary duty of the board members. So that makes board members accountable for all the shareholders. Now, we're expecting another round to that revision, and that would be including the cumulative voting, which would allow a lot of the minority shareholders to actually voice their rights and potentially elect at least one member of the board that is in favor of their interests. And so that would be a pretty significant change in terms of corporate code that we have been seeing, and that would, and then there are other rounds that is expected.
Sang-Mi Cha, Bloomberg's Asia Equities reporter, as we head towards the Korea market opens. Also Japan, take a look at how we're setting up for the session. We are seeing Nikkei futures gaining to the upside of 0.25% at a time when we're following Samsung as well in South Korea has just signed a 23 trillion won chip manufacturing deal with an unnamed client. The market opens are next. This is Bloomberg.
Bloomberg's global financial correspondent, I get to meet the people shaping the way money flows around the world. And I want to bring you with me. Now we're playing.
Yep, now we're playing. First and foremost, I am a capitalist. The capitalist system is the best system in the world. There isn't another one that works as well.
Citigroup moves $4 trillion a day.
5.
Wall Street used to be a place.
I love all these new Wall Streets. Y'all Street, Wall Street South.
Now it's more of an idea.
The optimism here is infectious.
You think our New Yorkers are negative?
Yes.
Anything that trains people to understand probabilities and just think through things with a greater degree of nuance is a service to humanity.
I hope you survived the day.
I did. It was a busy day.
Tune in to Bloomberg Business Week Daily.
We got to talk crypto.
From the magazine that helps global leaders stay ahead.
What's the conversation around your company?
Bringing you insight on the people, companies, and trends shaping today's complex economy.
Planning very big things.
A new level of premium.
Plus global business, finance, and tech news as it happens.
The floodgates of innovation are going to open up.
You can't fake passion. You either are or you aren't.
Bloomberg Business Week Daily, only on Bloomberg.
Key investors, top executives, global innovators. Join me for in-depth conversations with the biggest newsmakers on the day's top stories. Insight with Haslinda Anand, only on Bloomberg.
Bloomberg loves earnings.
I know it's like your Super Bowl, right?
I can't wait. It's like opening presents in the morning.
All right, it will be exciting.
Nobody covers earnings like Bloomberg.
This is Asia Trade. We're counting down to Asia's major market opens. It's a busy week. We have 40% of the S&P 500 companies reporting earnings this week, the busiest in the earnings season. Central bank decisions in the U.S., Japan, and of course, Heidi, that trade deal between the U.S. and the EU as well.
Yeah, we were talking just late last week about this sort of 15% baseline being potentially a new prototype after that was reached with Japan. And it looks like the EU has that benefit too. Plus, also potentially that pushing back of negotiations with China by another 90 days is what we're hearing.
And it was that trade deal that you mentioned, Heidi, with Japan that sent Japanese stocks on a tear. We're talking about the topics. 14-day RSI already being in overbought territory. Japanese stocks fell a little bit on the Friday session, but we continue to watch for more upside, given, of course, the optimism right now and the global risk sentiment. We are watching the Japanese yen holding at that 148 level on a week, of course, when we do have the Bank of Japan policy decision. No change expected this month, but do watch out for the JGB space because 2-year yields are already near highs that we haven't seen in 17 years. Nikkei futures pointing to the upside of 0.2%. Take a look at how South Korea is also coming online because one stock that we'll be watching is Samsung. It's now announced a 22.8 trillion won chip manufacturing deal with what it calls a major global company that it hasn't named. You can see the pop right there of more than 3% at the open. When we do have the Korean won also strengthening against the US dollar, the Kospi has been one of the best performing major markets in the world, and we're talking about inflows just for this month from overseas of more than $3 billion, Heidi.
Take a look at where we're shaping up when it comes to just that stagnant start to trading here in Australia. We're seeing a bit of upside, about 0.1% there. Of course, a lot of these trade cross currents, positive as they are, will be positive as a proxy for Australia as well, particularly if there is that extension of that US-China truce. Of course, the Aussie dollar trades as a strong correlation to any sort of positivity or negativity when it comes to China-related news. And positivity would be appreciated given some of the domestic data, particularly when it comes to industrial production, has not been particularly encouraging. Taking a look at the Aussie dollar, we are sitting at about 65.75 at the moment. We're also watching treasuries, given it is a big week, of course, when it comes to the decision from the Fed. Some of the, of course, between the president and Fed Chair Jay Powell, that's still sort of being worked through, as well as these broader sort of concerns and uncertainty over trade. The dollar index, interesting, did rise on Friday, but did have that weekly loss. So we're seeing a little bit of pass through when it comes to Asian currencies there. Watching dollar China in light of these talks in Stockholm. Also watching treasuries at the moment, but I should also mention crude is seeing a little bit of an uptick in the morning trading session here in Asia, despite weakening through last week. But some of that trade news is clearly benefiting commodities demand too, Sherry.
Yeah, let's start with those negotiations because the U.S. and European Union have struck that trade deal imposing a 15% tariff on most EU exports, including cars. As part of the pact, the bloc will ramp up purchases of American energy and boost investment in the U.S. while sidestepping President Trump's threat of steeper levies.
We've reached a deal. It's a good deal for everybody, I believe. And I think you were saying this is probably the biggest deal ever reached in any capacity, trade or beyond trade.
It is.
It's a giant deal with lots of countries.
We have a deal. We have a trade deal between the two largest economies in the world. And it's a big deal. It's a huge deal. It will bring stability. It will bring predictability. That's very important for our businesses on both sides of the Atlantic. It's 15% tariffs across the board, all inclusive.
Let's bring in Bloomberg News Desk editor Jill Deasy and our China correspondent Min Lo. Jill, let me start with you and the U.S.-EU trade deal. Of course, the devil is in the details, so what do we know so far?
Well, I would say that we're actually missing quite a few details, and there's a few things about this deal that don't entirely seem firm, so I do still think that we have to wait. I mean, obviously, first of all, I have to caveat with the fact that trade deals normally take years to ultimately develop and hammer out. We've really only been at this since about April or so. What we do know so far is obviously that overall 15% tariff also applying to automobiles. It certainly does imply that while that's lower than what Trump has been threatening in recent weeks, it is, sort of a bump up from some initial expectations toward the start of the year that Trump would install some kind of a 10% baseline. So, you do have that 15% number. You do have, these hundreds of billions of dollars that the EU has pledged apparently in investments in the U.S., some of that around the purchase of American energy products and such, along with some other investments that Trump has really touted here. But to me, there still seem to be some things that aren't entirely hammered out here. So Trump said that 15% tariff wouldn't apply to pharmaceuticals and metals. So these are two industries that, targeted or potentially targeted by additional sectoral tariffs. But then Ursula von der Leyen is saying that actually the pharmaceuticals component of this is covered by the 15% tariff. I think that's a really big sticking point here because, when you've got the U.S. potentially in the next couple of weeks handing down additional sectoral tariffs on things like pharmaceuticals, also things like semiconductors and such, I think really kind of sort of hammering those things out and trying to figure out the difference between what's covered under this reciprocal tariff agreement versus what's covered under those sectoral tariff agreements. Remember, we also have additional things like, steel and aluminum, of which it's a bit fuzzy how much of that is exactly covered in this deal. I think that does kind of open up this picture where, yes, they have reached a deal, at least in part here, but, it still seems like we have to learn a lot more about what's actually happening here. And I think really kind of hammer down some of those details, particularly those pharmaceutical ones.
And I mean, it's interesting, right, because as sort of prolonged and painful as these Japan and EU trade talks have been over the past few weeks and months, certainly one expects the China-US talks to be more complicated. Is that why we're hearing that this truce could be extended by another 3 months?
Yes, Scott Bessent had basically set the baseline expectation here. He said that, or he signaled that this truce could be extended. He didn't say by how long, but SCMP has reported based on sources that it could be extended by another 90 days. This could be because both countries are now looking at setting up for a potential meeting between the two leaders, President Xi and Trump, perhaps in October at the sidelines of the APEC summit in South Korea. And so in order for that to happen, they really need to set up the right atmosphere for it. And so a trade truce where both sides agree not to escalate things further could be a good way to ensure that meeting between the two sides happen. But yes, a lot is at stake. As Jill mentioned earlier, the sectoral tariffs particularly complicating things further because we know the US is already investigating a number of sectors, including semiconductors, pharmaceuticals. Those sectoral tariffs are not yet announced. If the two sides, China and US, agree to a trade truce, will it be, derailed by further sectoral tariffs that come out later on? And will China be exempted from some of these sectoral tariffs? That's a big question as well.
So, Min, when could we see that Xi-Trump meeting, and what more work needs to be done before they actually meet?
So the meeting could potentially be in October at the sidelines of the ASEAN summit in Kuala Lumpur, or perhaps at the sidelines of the APEC summit in South Korea. Of course, in September, there is a military parade in Beijing as well. That could be another potential for the two sides to meet. But when it comes to the trade deal, there are a few scenarios that Bloomberg Economics has gamed out. One is we don't see a deal, essentially continuation of the status quo. That is a possible scenario. But if a deal does come to pass, it could look like something that is similar to the Phase 1 trade deal, maybe a commitment to buy a certain amount of U.S. goods. Howard Lutnick already indicated that purchase commitments from China, especially when it comes to agricultural goods, could be on the table. But the question then is, what is the U.S. willing to give in order to get the purchase commitment from China? Because remember, those agricultural goods tariff from China came in retaliation to the fentanyl-related tariffs of 20%. China is likely going into these talks hoping to get a reduction on the fentanyl-related tariffs, especially given they have made some efforts to, add 2 more ingredients of fentanyl into this restricted list. Trump has similarly praised the effort there. Is this enough to get the U.S. to lower tariffs? For now, some sources are saying chances are still very slim.
And Jill, of course, now that we've got Japan and the EU sort of out of the way, at least these big headlines, we're expecting the Korean Finance Minister, the US Treasury Secretary to meet in the coming days. What concessions are we potentially hearing about, particularly when it comes to things that I know the president, it matters a lot to him, like shipbuilding, like rice exports?
Yeah, I think that when it comes to Korea, ultimately, it sounds like they're already considering some investments in the U.S. That would track pretty well with, what we've at least heard out of these announcements from the EU and Japan as well. Also, maybe agricultural products are under consideration here. I think that if you're Korea, ultimately, you just really want to knock down that 25% tariff rate that they've been threatened with. That would be up from 10%. Maybe it could be that, given, some of these economies that seem to be getting a little bit more attention and care in some of these individual talks, that they could be on a track where their overall tariff rate, that sort of bench line looks like something that Japan or the EU would get, that 15%. Maybe it creeps a little bit higher. I think it kind of depends on how those negotiations go. But also, if you're Korea, I think you're particularly worried about some of those sectoral tariffs, as are, everybody else, when it comes to autos. So, obviously a lot that's under discussion, in the coming days, as these two sides try to hammer something out before that August 1st deadline on Friday. But again, I think just kind of shows, as do all of these deals and all of the still confusing and sort of unclear parts of them, that these are really, really complex trade deals. Maybe we get an announcement, maybe you get some top-line figures that we can kind of review and sort of glean from, but it does kind of seem that even with those top-line deals being announced, there's still a lot more to go before these trade pacts are ultimately hammered out.
Bloomberg News Desk editor Jill Desis there, also our China correspondent Min Min Lo, they're joining us in Hong Kong. Well, let's take a look at the market perspective with Xi Xiao, who's the financial advisor and managing director at UBS. Really great to have you with us. We've seen a little bit of raising of expectations from Goldman's when it comes to what they see as the benefit to the Japanese market, for example. But by and large, this sort of seems to be the best case scenario that investors and financial markets have been assuming for quite some time.
Får ikke gjort så mye nå uansett. Jeg tror ikke det skjer så jævla mye før sånn 4.
The market is intact and U.S. equities have scope to rise further. Just earnings are coming in very strong. The economy is strong and we have a strong consumer base. So any volatility in the near term, that certainly can be productive.
Ja, jeg tror ikke det skjer så jævla mye før sånn 4. Kanskje den går litt opp og ned med $2-3. Jeg tror ikke det skjer så veldig mye.
View on the market is still very positive.
where are you
Jeg
seeing
tror sånn
opportunities
noe
given how sort of
prate ut den, ja. Det kommer en, ja, nå tror jeg.
investors have been?
Ja,
and
jeg
also
håper
given
det, men
that we still
jeg
have a
vet
great deal
ikke.
of uncertainty when it comes to the data side, earnings, of course, coming in thick and fast, as well as some uncertainty as to how central banks can progress from here.
Yes, I mean,
Det
next week
rørte seg lite
obviously
til
earnings is gonna be a big tech week,
importørene
and
til dem.
we still feel very strongly about U.S. tech, particularly driven by AI. Some of the large mega cap stock has done very well this year.
Det var sikkert lov å ta
Continue to
kveld.
see that.
Det var straks i morgen. Jeg er på litt tidlig i morgen.
Healthcare, financials, and
Ja, men det er vi.
utilities are all some of our preferred equity
Jeg